The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Buckingham Palace as Kate Catherine walked through the grand corridors. Her footsteps echoed softly against the high ceilings, each sound seeming to whisper secrets of centuries past. She had been working as a palace staff member for 3 years now, but today felt different somehow. Kate had started her journey at the palace as a young woman fresh out of university, desperate for any job that would help her support her aging mother back in their small village. The palace had seemed like a distant dream when she first applied for the position of assistant curator in the royal collection. She never imagined she would be accepted, let alone thrive in such a prestigious environment. The elderly monarch, Queen Elizabeth, had always been a figure of mystery to Kate. During her years of service, she had only glimpsed the Queen from afar during formal ceremonies and state functions. The staff were taught to maintain respectful distance, to bow appropriately, and to speak only when spoken to. Kate had followed these rules religiously, understanding the weight of tradition that surrounded every aspect of palace life. On this particular Tuesday morning in late autumn, Kate received an unexpected summons to the blue drawing room. Her supervisor, Mrs. Henderson, delivered the message with a mixture of concern and curiosity in her voice. The Queen had specifically requested Kate's presence to discuss a matter regarding the royal archives. Kate's heart raced as she made her way through the palace corridors, wondering what could possibly require her personal attention. The blue drawing room had always intimidated Kate with its opulent furnishings and priceless artwork. The walls were adorned with paintings by master artists, and the furniture spoke of generations of royal history. As she approached the room, Kate noticed how unusually quiet the palace had become. The usual bustle of staff members seemed to have diminished, as if the very building was holding its breath. Kate had been working on a special project for the past 6 months, cataloging personal letters and documents from the Queen's private collection. These weren't the usual state papers or official correspondence that historians typically studied. Instead, they were intimate family letters, personal photographs, and handwritten notes that revealed the human side of the royal family. Among these documents, Kate had discovered something that had deeply moved her. Hidden within a collection of wartime correspondence, she found a series of letters written by the Queen as a young princess during World War II. The letters were addressed to children who had been evacuated from London during the Blitz. In these handwritten notes, the teenage princess had shared words of comfort and hope with children who had been separated from their families. What struck Kate most profoundly was the personal nature of these letters. They weren't formal royal communications or publicity gestures. They were genuine expressions of empathy from a young woman who, despite her privileged position, understood the pain of separation and uncertainty. The princess had written about her own fears and hopes, creating real connections with children who needed comfort during the darkest period of the war. Kate had spent weeks carefully preserving and documenting these letters. She had researched the backgrounds of the children who had received them, discovering that many had kept the royal correspondence throughout their lives as treasured possessions. Some had passed the letters down to their own children and grandchildren, viewing them as symbols of hope and resilience. The discovery had changed Kate's perception of the royal family entirely. She began to see beyond the ceremonial aspects of monarchy to the genuine human beings beneath the crowns and titles. The teenage princess who had written those comforting words had grown up to become the Queen, but Kate realized that the same compassionate heart still beat within the elderly monarch. As Kate approached the blue drawing room, she carried with her a leather portfolio containing the restored letters. She had intended to present them to Mrs. Henderson for review before they were officially archived. However, the direct summons from the Queen suggested that Her Majesty had already learned about the discovery. The palace corridors seemed longer than usual as Kate made her way to the appointment. She passed portraits of previous monarchs, their painted eyes seeming to follow her progress. The weight of history pressed down upon her shoulders, reminding her of the countless individuals who had walked these same halls over the centuries. Kate's own background made her particularly sensitive to the themes she had discovered in the wartime letters. She had grown up in a working-class family in a small Yorkshire village. Her father had died when she was 12, leaving her mother to raise 3 children on her own. Kate understood intimately the feelings of uncertainty and loss that the evacuated children must have experienced during the war. Her academic background in history and archive management had prepared her technically for the work at the palace, but nothing had prepared her emotionally for the personal connections she would discover within the royal documents. Each letter, each photograph, each handwritten note revealed layers of human experience that transcended social class and royal protocol. The Queen's private secretary, Sir Michael, greeted Kate outside the blue drawing room with his usual formal courtesy. He explained that Her Majesty had learned about Kate's work on the wartime correspondence and wished to discuss the matter personally. Kate felt a mixture of pride and nervousness as she realized that her careful work had come to the attention of the monarch herself. As Kate waited outside the blue drawing room, she reflected on the path that had brought her to this moment. 3 years earlier, she had been a recent graduate struggling to find meaningful work in her chosen field. The position at the palace had seemed like an impossible dream, but her professors had encouraged her to apply, recognizing her passion for historical preservation and her meticulous attention to detail. The interview process had been intimidating, with multiple rounds of questioning and background checks. Kate had almost withdrawn her application several times, convinced that she wasn't suitable for such a prestigious position. However, something had compelled her to continue, perhaps the same determination that had helped her succeed in university despite her family's financial struggles. Now, standing outside the blue drawing room with the restored letters in her portfolio, Kate felt the full weight of responsibility that came with her position. These weren't just historical documents. They were precious memories and connections that linked the present to the past. The teenage princess who had written those letters had grown up to rule for decades, but the compassionate spirit revealed in the correspondence remained constant. Sir Michael opened the door and announced Kate's arrival. As she stepped into the blue drawing room, Kate was struck by how different it appeared when occupied by the Queen herself. The formal grandeur remained, but there was also an unmistakable sense of personal presence that transformed the space into something more intimate and human. Queen Elizabeth sat in her favorite armchair near the window, where the afternoon light illuminated the lines of experience and wisdom that marked her face. She wore a simple blue dress with her signature pearls, appearing more like a beloved grandmother than the powerful monarch she was known to be throughout the world. Her hands rested gently on a small stack of papers that Kate immediately recognized as copies of the wartime letters. The Queen looked up as Kate entered, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Kate executed her practiced curtsy, bowing her head respectfully as she had been taught during her orientation years earlier. However, something in the Queen's expression suggested that this meeting would be unlike any formal royal encounter Kate had ever witnessed or imagined. "Please, sit down, my dear," the Queen said, her voice carrying a warmth that surprised Kate. The invitation to sit in the presence of the monarch was unusual enough to make Kate hesitate momentarily. She had been trained that staff members typically remained standing unless specifically invited to do otherwise, and such invitations were rare during formal audiences. Kate chose a chair positioned at a respectful distance from the Queen, placing her leather portfolio carefully on the small table beside her. She waited quietly for the Queen to speak. Following the protocol she had learned about never initiating conversation with the monarch, the blue drawing room felt unusually intimate despite its grand proportions, as if the significance of the moment had transformed the space into something more personal. I understand you have been working with some very old letters, the Queen began, her eyes moving to the papers in her lap. Letters that I wrote many years ago, during a time when the world seemed very dark indeed. There was something in her voice that spoke of memories long held, of a young woman who had tried to bring comfort to others during impossible circumstances. Kate nodded carefully before responding. Yes, Your Majesty. The letters were discovered in the private archives during the cataloging project. They were beautifully preserved, considering their age. The families who received them clearly treasured them throughout the decades. She spoke slowly and clearly, wanting to convey the respect and care with which she had treated the precious documents. The Queen's expression softened as she listened to Kate's words. I had wondered what became of those letters, she said quietly. I wrote them when I was barely 18 years old. London was being bombed nightly, and we heard stories of children who had been sent away from their families for safety. I felt so helpless, sitting in relative comfort while these young people faced such uncertainty. Kate felt her heart respond to the vulnerability in the Queen's voice. This was not the formal monarch she had observed from afar during state ceremonies. This was a woman remembering her younger self, reflecting on choices made during one of history's darkest periods. Kate realized she was witnessing something extraordinary, a moment of genuine human connection that transcended the barriers of protocol and social position. The children's families kept every letter, Your Majesty, Kate said gently. I researched the recipients while working on the preservation project. Many of them spoke about those letters in interviews years later. They said your words gave them hope when they felt most alone and frightened. Kate's voice carried genuine emotion as she shared what she had learned during her months of research. The Queen looked out the window for a moment, and Kate could see that she was processing this information deeply. I never knew, the Queen said finally. At the time I worried that my words were inadequate. What comfort could a privileged young woman offer to children facing such real hardships? I feared that my attempts to help were merely gestures that meant little in the face of their genuine suffering. Kate felt compelled to respond, despite the formal setting. Your Majesty, the children wrote back to you. Their letters are also in the archives. They described how much your correspondence meant to them. One boy wrote that receiving a letter from a princess made him feel like someone important cared about his situation. A girl mentioned that your letters reminded her that she wasn't forgotten, even though she was far from home. The Queen's eyes returned to Kate's face, and there was something new in her expression, a mixture of surprise and deep emotion. They wrote back to me? She asked. I don't remember receiving responses. Perhaps the staff thought it was inappropriate to show them to me, or perhaps they were lost during the war. They are all there, Your Majesty, Kate assured her. Dozens of letters from children telling you about their lives in the countryside, sharing their hopes and fears, thanking you for remembering them. The correspondence created real relationships that lasted throughout the war years. Some children continued writing even after they returned to London. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable, but rather filled with the weight of discovery and memory. Kate watched as the Queen processed the knowledge that her teenage efforts to comfort others had created lasting impact in ways she had never known. The formal atmosphere of the blue drawing room seemed to fade as two women shared a moment of genuine human connection across generations and social boundaries. May I see them? The Queen asked quietly. The letters they sent to me? Kate immediately reached for her portfolio and carefully withdrew a folder containing photocopies of the children's correspondence. She had brought them hoping that the Queen might be interested, but she hadn't expected this level of personal engagement. She approached the Queen's chair and placed the folder gently on the small table within reach. The Queen's hands trembled slightly as she opened the folder and began reading the first letter. It was written in a child's careful handwriting, thanking the princess for her kind words and describing life on a farm in Devon. The young writer had drawn a small picture at the bottom of the page, showing a girl with a crown next to a boy holding a sheep. As the Queen read, Kate watched her face transform. Years seemed to fall away as memories returned of the young woman who had sat at her desk night after night, writing personal letters to children she would never meet. The formal mask of monarchy slipped away, revealing the human heart that had always beaten beneath the crown. "This boy, Tommy," the Queen said, pointing to one of the letters. "He wrote about missing his mother's cooking. I remember now. I asked the kitchen staff for recipes that could be sent to evacuation families. Such a small thing. But he says here that making his mother's pudding helped him feel connected to home." Kate leaned forward slightly, sharing in the Queen's rediscovery of these forgotten connections. "Tommy Morrison," she said. "He became a chef after the war. He opened a small restaurant in East London and always said that cooking connected him to both his mother and to the kindness shown to him during the evacuation. He passed away 5 years ago, but his daughter still has all your letters." The Queen looked up at Kate with wonder in her eyes. "You researched all of them? You found out what happened to these children?" There was something almost incredulous in her voice, as if she couldn't quite believe that someone had cared enough to trace these long-ago connections. "It became important to me, Your Majesty," Kate admitted. "Reading your letters and theirs, I began to understand how these small acts of kindness created ripples that lasted for decades. Many of the recipients became teachers, social workers, or volunteers. They said your example taught them the importance of reaching out to help others during difficult times." The Queen continued reading through the letters, occasionally pausing to share memories that the children's words had triggered. She spoke about the isolation she had felt during the war, despite being surrounded by staff and family members. Writing to the evacuated children had given her a sense of purpose and connection to the real suffering that ordinary people were experiencing. Kate found herself sharing details about her research, describing how she had tracked down family members and conducted interviews with survivors. She explained how the correspondence had revealed not just the impact of royal kindness, but also the resilience and hope that had sustained ordinary families during extraordinary times. The afternoon light began to fade as the Queen and Kate continued their conversation. The formal protocols that usually governed royal interactions seemed to dissolve naturally as they shared their mutual fascination with these human stories from the past. Kate realized that she was experiencing something unprecedented, a genuine conversation with the monarch as one human being to another. As the afternoon progressed, the Queen set aside the letters and looked directly at Kate with an expression of profound gratitude. The formal distance that typically separated monarch and subject had somehow evaporated during their shared exploration of these precious memories. Kate felt that she was no longer speaking with the Queen of England, but rather with Elizabeth, a woman who had lived through extraordinary times and was now discovering the lasting impact of her youthful compassion. "You have given me an incredible gift," the Queen said, her voice thick with emotion. "For 70 years, I have carried the uncertainty of whether those letters mattered. I often wondered if I had been naive to think that words from a privileged young woman could provide real comfort to children facing genuine hardship. You have shown me that kindness, no matter how small it might seem, can create connections that last a lifetime." Kate felt tears welling in her eyes as she witnessed the Queen's emotional response. She had expected this meeting to be a formal presentation of archived materials, but instead, she found herself part of a deeply personal moment of discovery and healing. The blue drawing room, with all its grand formality, had become the setting for an intimate conversation that transcended social boundaries and royal protocol. "Your Majesty," Kate said softly, "working with these letters changed my understanding of history. I learned that the most important stories aren't always about great events or famous battles. Sometimes they're about a teenage girl who took time to write personal letters to frightened children, or about families who kept those letters as treasured possessions for decades. These small acts of human connection are what truly matter. The Queen nodded slowly, understanding the deeper meaning of Kate's words. Throughout my reign, I have focused on duty and service, on fulfilling the obligations of my position. But these letters remind me that the most meaningful moments often happen away from the public eye, in simple acts of reaching out to others who need comfort or encouragement. Kate thought about her own journey to this moment. 3 years earlier, she had been struggling to find her place in the world, unsure of how her academic training in history could make a real difference. Working with the Royal Archives had shown her that preserving and sharing human stories was more than just academic exercise. It was a way of honoring the connections that bind people together across time and circumstances. "Your Majesty, there's something else," Kate said, reaching into her portfolio once more. "Several of the children's families asked me to pass along messages if I ever had the opportunity to communicate with the royal family. They wanted to thank you for the kindness their parents and grandparents received all those years ago." Kate withdrew a small collection of contemporary letters, written by the descendants of the evacuated children. These modern correspondences carried forward the gratitude and respect that had been passed down through generations. The Queen accepted them with hands that trembled slightly, overwhelmed by the continuity of connection that spanned nearly 8 decades. As the Queen read these new letters, Kate watched her face light up with wonder and joy. One letter was from Tommy Morrison's daughter, describing how her father had named his restaurant Princess in honor of the royal correspondent who had brightened his childhood. Another came from the granddaughter of a girl who had become a teacher, explaining how the principle of reaching out to help others had become a family tradition inspired by the Queen's wartime letters. "This is extraordinary," the Queen murmured, looking up at Kate with eyes bright with tears. "These families remembered. They passed down the story of a young princess who wrote them letters during the war. Their children and grandchildren grew up knowing about this connection." Kate nodded, deeply moved by the Queen's response. "Your Majesty, your letters didn't just comfort frightened children during the war. They planted seeds of kindness that grew into family values passed down through generations. The recipients taught their children about the importance of reaching out to help others, just as you had reached out to help them." The silence that followed was profound and peaceful. The Queen held the letters against her chest for a moment, as if trying to absorb the full impact of what she had learned. Kate felt privileged to witness this deeply personal moment, understanding that she had been instrumental in reuniting the Queen with a part of her own history that had been lost for decades. "Kate," the Queen said, using her first name for the first time during their meeting, "I want you to know that your work has meant more to me than I can adequately express. You have reminded an old woman that the choices we make in youth, even small acts of kindness, can echo through generations in ways we never imagine." Kate felt overwhelmed by the honor of being addressed so personally by the Queen. "Your Majesty, working with these letters has been the greatest privilege of my career. They taught me that history isn't just about dates and events. It's about human connections and the ways that people care for each other during difficult times." The Queen stood slowly and walked to the window, gazing out at the palace gardens where the autumn light was beginning to fade. Kate remained seated, understanding that the Queen needed a moment to process all that she had learned. The blue drawing room felt sacred in its quietness, as if the very walls were holding the weight of this extraordinary conversation. When the Queen turned back to Kate, her face was serene but transformed. "I would like you to continue this work," she said. "There may be other forgotten connections in the archives, other stories of human kindness that deserve to be remembered and honored. Will you help me find them? Kate rose from her chair, understanding that this request was both a professional assignment and a personal trust. Of course, Your Majesty. It would be an honor to continue exploring these connections between the past and present. As Kate prepared to leave, the Queen approached her with surprising informality. The rigid protocols that usually governed royal interactions seemed to have dissolved entirely during their afternoon together. The Queen reached out and gently took Kate's hands in her own, a gesture that would have been unthinkable at the beginning of their meeting. "Thank you," the Queen said simply, but her words carried the weight of decades of gratitude and discovery. "You have given me back a part of myself that I thought was lost forever." Kate felt the full impact of the Queen's words as she looked into her eyes. This was no longer the distant monarch she had observed from afar during formal ceremonies. This was Elizabeth, a woman who had learned that her youthful attempts to comfort others had created lasting legacies of kindness and connection. As Kate curtsied one final time before leaving the blue drawing room, she understood that this afternoon had changed both of their lives profoundly. The Queen had rediscovered the lasting impact of her compassionate choices, while Kate had learned that her work as an archivist was more than just preserving documents. It was about honoring the human connections that make life meaningful. Walking back through the palace corridors, Kate reflected on the extraordinary afternoon she had just experienced. The grand halls and priceless artworks remained the same, but everything felt different now. She had witnessed the human heart beneath the crown, and she understood that the most important treasures in the royal collection weren't the jewels or paintings, but the stories of kindness and connection that linked the monarchy to the ordinary people they served. The palace had grown quiet around them during their conversation, as if the building itself had recognized the significance of what was taking place. Now, as Kate made her way back to her office, she carried with her not just the memory of an unprecedented royal audience, but the understanding that small acts of kindness can create ripples that last for generations, touching lives in ways we may never know, but that matter more than we can imagine.